Welcome to Digital Marketing ROI, the podcast that connects marketing to your business's revenue and covers everything you need to know to stay up to date in this crazy digital marketing world.
Welcome to Digital Marketing ROI. I'm your host, Shannon Allen, and I'm joined by my favorite co-host, Krystal. Hi, Krystal.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
I'm good. I'm ready for spring. We talked about this the last time we met, but boy, when it comes to April, I start to think that it's never going to snow again, but I just know there could be snow right around the corner.
I know it does snow in April. When it does finally snow in April, I feel like it snows once in April.
And then it flakes. Yeah. My daughter's birthday is April 5th. Year after year, we've had that, We've had that. So, but I'm not doing anything for spring break this year.
I was just about to ask that. Are you going anywhere?
No, we
warm?
went to Cancun in February during her mid-winter break, and that was my way of beating the crowds.
Yeah, that's smart.
And it was the best vacation. I'm not a crowd person. I don't like a bunch of people.
It's not as relaxing.
We did all-inclusive, sat on the beach every day, and I didn't have to make decisions, which is my favorite thing to do.
That's the best. That's a real vacation. You don't have to make any decisions.
The nonstop flight. The first time my daughter was out of the country, it was just easy peasy. So I'll do it again. But I do miss the beach. I'm going to be missing that here.
Well,
everybody else is in Florida.
In a couple of months, we will be on the beach of Lake Michigan.
Yeah, there you go. That's true. Well, today we're going to talk about a specific industry, the cannabis industry, which we've talked about on this podcast before, and we're past first quarter now, going into second, but really about the cannabis industry and the marketing trends in 2025 as it relates to digital marketing and where that industry is going. That's changed so much since we started Cannabis Digital Solutions back in 2020, COVID.
Yes.
Right? So let's jump right in.
I would like to start by laying the land of where we are, especially here in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and the Midwest. How is the cannabis market evolving in 2025?
Let's start with Michigan, because that's why I wanted to start the cannabis division. I'm from Michigan, and it was really right after, we'd passed laws that it was legalized. So Michigan has grown into a $3 billion market, becoming the Midwest cannabis leader over any of the other states. Illinois was next to pass their laws, and they've reached $2.5 billion. So they're quickly catching up, and they're continuing to grow. And then Ohio was really the newest recreational market, but still sitting at $1.8 billion. So those numbers are staggering. And that's all recreational.
Those are huge numbers, especially when you think about Michigan launched it in 2020. Illinois was a year or so later. Ohio has just been 1 year.
I know. It's always a learning curve, but I think Michigan was the leader. They probably dealt with more issues than Illinois and Ohio had to, because they were one of the first, for 10 states that really went into that when it was starting to become legal.
Yes.
Just like California went through their own learning curves because they were one of the first to make it legal. I don't even remember the year now.
Yeah.
So what we're noticing across the board in Michigan is the competition is fierce. And we have seen businesses come and go faster than any other industry I've ever dealt with. It's really driving the prices down because there's so much competition with over 600 retail stores.
That's a ton of retail stores. Even if you go across the state of Michigan up into the UP, that is a ton. I remember back in the early days where it seemed like there was a weed shop on every corner, like Starbucks.
Well, my little town of Decatur, there's like 3, and I live in a town of like 3,500 people.
At a certain point, there's a saturation point, especially when they're all selling very similar products, because it's not just, we're selling what we grow. They're selling products that have been manufactured across the state. Do you think that we're going to see any kind of changes in terms of the amount of dispensaries that we have in Michigan?
Well, yes and no. We are. I think what we're going to see is bigger companies buying up some of the independent dispensaries, which is always sad to see, because I think kind of like the brewery industry, we went through that with the breweries where there was a lot of independent, and then eventually the big players get involved, right? And we'll talk about that here kind of towards the end of the podcast. You're also seeing the stores that are doing well are expanding beyond flower. The ones that are really getting into the edibles, drinks, and wellness products. So that's starting to boom. And so if you are more than just a flower shop, which means you're buying the actual cannabis, you are offering a lot more to the person that's walking in the door now.
Yes, there's the vapes and the concentrates.
Which attracts that older adult. I would say I'm the target audience. I'm the 50-year-old that never really used any cannabis products, and now I'm seeing doing it on the wellness side, or maybe it's instead of drinking and using the calories. Right now, statistically, 35% of users are now over the age of 45, which continues to grow. Michigan really benefits from that tourism from neighboring states. So, we are in Indiana, and there's so many that I know of that are on the border that particularly bought locations so that people would cross the border to come into the tourism part of it.
100%.
They do.
And Wisconsin,
Yes.
same thing does.
Yep.
It's really intense. In the last 5 years, there's been a lot of changes in the landscape. Do you feel like we're heading towards where it's like Budweiser, Miller Lite, where we have these big players that are there, then just a couple of craft breweries here and there pop out? Do you think it's something where only a few major players survive?
We are growing towards that. I'm starting to see a couple of really big players that have a handful of stores in Michigan, a handful of stores in Illinois, handful of stores in Arizona. So you're seeing the bigger players looking at it as opportunity. You are right now. So looking at how it's really transformed, in 2020, we saw mainly independent operators, and now we're seeing the bigger players are controlling about 45% of the market. Those businesses are starting to control a larger part of it, but that's still not a bad statistic. If over half is still independently owned, their costs are probably higher because they can't produce in one place. One thing that has really changed from even 2020 is people are going more to the growing inside, right? In Michigan, it was a big deal of, we have all these pot farms. People were producing soil that works really good out in these farms, and you're seeing more of those close and everybody moving to inside, because when you're dealing with a state like Michigan and our weather is always drunk and you don't know if one day, it's like today it's almost 70 degrees out and tomorrow it's going to be 35, and do we get below freezing? You have to adjust, and I think that was one of the biggest changes I saw right off the bat was when I first started dipping my toes into helping businesses, that the ones that were like, we have a farm here and we're outside growers, we don't have an inside grow room. I was always like, I don't know if that's the business we want to go after and help them with their marketing, because I don't know if they don't have a plan B if they're going to be around.
They need something consistent if they're going to be growing year round, because even in the best case scenario, for a good chunk of the year, the weather is insane.
Yep.
and it's drunk, but at least most of the time it's good, or at least more than half the time. But then you get winter and it's like you can't grow anything outside in the winter time.
Well, I remember when we first started working with some of the smaller businesses, and their cart purchases were 75 to 100, and now they're down to 50. But buying this amount of product. What's happening is those wholesale prices have dropped 60 to 70% with the competition, and they have to be competitive. So their profit margins have been brought down. But let's keep in mind, they also went through a period where their profit margins were amazing, and they had to be able to adjust to that, to know that that wasn't probably the norm. Most people weren't making an 80 to 90% profit margin. If you were making a 30 to 40%, then you were actually, that's more of a norm.
Yes,
right?
That's much more reasonable. Yeah. That's what you should be expecting. And that's a good profit margin for most businesses.
Yes. Similar to the brewery industry, right? You had a lot of those craft breweries that started to get bigger and bigger. We're seeing a parallel with the craft cannabis that have their own niche, and they might sell their own product and grow their own product, limited to just one or two items. They might bring in other products on their edibles. They're very specific with a couple of their flower products. The ones that do it smart and have a strategy behind it are doing better. Businesses that are at the most risk are those mid-sized operators. The real small ones have got something figured out, and the large ones that have it figured out. It's the middle guys that are not sure which they want to be.
Right.
And you've got to pick a lane.
Are they going to scale up, or are they going to focus on that more like local mom and shop, small town kind of shop feel?
We talked in another podcast about influencers. I think about the bud tenders, right? The bud tenders in every single store offer a different experience, and the little guys are figuring out how to make those experiences part of their brand. They almost become like their go-to doctor, their expert that they can go to and really walk them through what they're looking for and what they need. People are standing out if they need to. If not, the bigger companies are there. It's the mid-sized groups that really need to figure out what they were in 2020 and what they are now and where they want to be in 5 years. The landscape has changed consistently, and it's only going to continue to change. The one missing link to me, and we'll keep talking about this, is your marketing. You have to stand apart and get your message out there, whether that be through digital marketing. I mean, there's still billboards you can do, but let's be clear, a billboard for cannabis is really just get off the exit now and we're here. You're not selling your brand on that billboard.
And you're also not standing out because you're in a sea of every other billboard along roads along the state line.
We're trying to figure out the difference between a new user and an existing user. If we don't find new business, we don't survive. If the cannabis industry doesn't try to attract a new user, a new audience, they will not survive on just their loyalty people.
And you can't just trust the people who are going to be turning 21 and can buy for the first time. So let's talk about those consumer behaviors that cannabis users have. And maybe it's separated by new cannabis users or curious users versus people who are active, consistent cannabis users. What are their behaviors like, and how is that shifting, especially in the Midwest, and how does that relate to marketing?
So with my research, I broke it up between Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio. Michigan consumers are more price sensitive right now, but they're willing to try new brands based on the price competition. Illinois customers show stronger brand loyalty right now, and they will pay more for premium products. But we saw that in the trends with Michigan when it first happened.
I feel like that's a phase
that
I think all the states are going
It's
through.
like we're dating, right?
Yes.
It's like a honeymoon phase is over. Now just tell me the price.
And give me the cheapest stuff. That's the best.
Right. It's kind of like our age group. Back in the day, we used to drink whatever beer was on sale, on tap. And now it's like, I would rather pay up for this. I don't really care what your specials are.
I don't need to put Natty Light in my body anymore.
Exactly. That's such a good example. So Ohio's market is really still in that discovery mode. They're at that education mode, which is really the part I loved when we first started doing this. And your team does such a good part of that with our blogs for cannabis. We're still finding that most consumers, 65% in fact, are still researching their products online, just like anything else we do. Now, keep in mind, that number is like 95% of most products their research starts online. But the fact that cannabis, I bet there's a lot of business owners out there that do not realize this, especially that brand new user, like that person that you want to attract.
Yes. Well, if they're going to your website to do research, they're not just going to your website.
Right.
And they're trying to look for information. They want the educational stuff. They're going to look for your blogs. They're probably researching other blogs. If they've been using cannabis, they're looking to compare the products, the THC percentages, the terpene profile, the availability, and the prices. And they're making their decision on where they're going to go. They'll get loyalty points at every dispensary.
Exactly. The cannabis consumer journey is not any different than any other consumer journey. There's a reason why the TJ Maxx's of the world do well, because they offer a little bit for everybody. The businesses that are just selling their flower only and their brand only, and they don't dabble in the edibles, the drinks, and all these other products, people that are new users want to know more. They want to see what else is out there, because they might be like, I'm never going to be the person that smokes a joint. I'm just not that person, and my education level isn't there. I want to see it's easy for me to look at a gummy and cut it in half and be like, I'll try this, right? Yes. But think of it like it's a DSW versus a TJ Maxx, where DSW, I'm going to buy a pair of shoes and I know I want a pair of shoes.
Right.
I might want to look at the shoes, but I want to try on some clothes and look at some purses. And oh, by the way, I got homeware back here. So that new user, you know where you're going to shop. And I think that is something that we have to remember consumer behavior. So when it comes to strategy and what you're marketing, everything comes back to following that consumer behavior, your target audience. Women now make up 42% of cannabis consumers across all three of these markets, which is really a large number.
That's a huge number. And I think there's a big stereotype of that cannabis is for men. Cannabis is a male thing. Yeah. And women are 42%. I think nationwide, they're close to 50%. We have a cannabis client that we work with. They are a manufacturer. They sell in New York right now. They're expanding eventually. We hope to Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois as well. They specialize in pink pre-rolls. She calls it Canna Couture and very feminine smoking experience.
Yep.
And I think I'm very interested to see how other products like that start popping up for women, because it is a different audience. They want some different things, but they want some things that are the same. But I think if you walk into a dispensary, it is very masculine. Mm-hmm. And how do you balance that?
And make a woman feel welcome, that they don't feel uncomfortable walking in the door.
Yes. Yeah. And then you talked earlier about the wellness. I think I'm honestly a little shocked that this hasn't happened yet. Maybe this is a business idea, but is a women's wellness center that includes cannabis, or a dispensary that focuses on women from the wellness perspective. You have to be careful to not go into the health claims, but with a lot more wellness products, including CBD products. And there's
Yes.
a lot of things that are for period cramps and all sorts of things. I would not be surprised if we start to see more specialty niche things like that to cater to that audience.
And I think the biggest mistake some of our current clients or past clients or people that, you know, we want to work with and help, the biggest mistakes that I see is they're not focusing on the education portion of it. They're focusing, you see a lot of ad driven, come buy this and here's my price point.
Yes.
I'm not saying there's not a need for that. Like I just got done saying that Michigan is still very price focused because we've grown through some of the stages, but you're missing out if you can afford, and most of them can, you have to have a whole pillar, a whole campaign dedicated to education and bringing in, again, it has to be more than your returning user. They're coming back.
Yes.
You have to go after a new market. The education part of the consumer journey is really where those things have changed from 5 years ago.
You said that focusing in the ads on a price or anything very product specific is not working. What digital marketing approaches and strategies are working for cannabis brands, especially in the Midwest?
So when it comes to digital marketing, and I'm going to focus on there, but I'll also talk about traditional. For what we do and what we find works the best, unlike most of our clients, we don't talk a lot about SEO to our existing clients because SEM is where we want to be, right? The paid search ads on Google AdWords. But with cannabis, you're not allowed to do that. But we do really well with display marketing. They do well with SEO, but we like to really talk to them about blog content and how to use that. We use our FDS local, which is the directory, so that you can be found, not just the billboard people are missing. You want to be found on an online search. If you're not found on an online search, utilizing all these directories correctly, you're missing out on those 65% that are starting their search online, right?
100%.
But our display ads that we can target consumers as they walk into your competitor's place and then walk in, you know, and let them know why they should come see the blog content, the social media that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So definitely SEO, definitely display. Video OTT is doing so well than ever before because there's platforms that are allowing that commercial to come up, and we didn't see that 5 years ago, right? It wasn't, you know, there was a lot of places just getting into the cannabis and had no idea what the regulations were. Loyalty programs do really well if you really have a good drip campaign, which means you know what their loyalty program is, you know what they're buying. If they're not buying, then they go on this list and they get a text message. So having that loyalty program and the text messages and the email platforms all tied in with the same strategies, right? Again, educational content, use personalizing things. If you have a CRM system that you can personalize and then layer that into some of your digital marketing, it all goes hand in hand. I could go on and on about the digital strategies that we do that I have such high ROI with our clients, the ones that do work with us on it. So we do really well. Those are the items I wanted to talk about, but I want to flip it to you and let's talk about social media because that's your expertise and we work with clients that you do currently. So how is social media marketing for cannabis really evolving this year, and what strategies should they be thinking about as far as platform and content?
So social media is a big challenge for cannabis brands, and I think every cannabis brand listening would
agree.
Because the platforms, every single platform, barring LinkedIn, which I'll get to that, every single platform is vehemently anti-cannabis, and they have gotten stricter and stricter, especially in recent months. In December, Instagram did a huge shutdown of a bunch of cannabis brands nationwide that were violating its terms of services and community engagement rules, which basically says do not promote cannabis, do not promote cannabis products or the sale of anything cannabis. And we've always had to toe the line. In March, they doubled down, and we saw another huge round of big brands, well-known brands, especially in Michigan, get shut down out of nowhere within a week of each other. It was surprising, but it's not surprising when you think about what most brands are publishing on Instagram. Facebook followed suit the following week, where they started to shut down a lot more. If you search for a cannabis brand on Instagram, unless you know the exact Instagram handle, they will not come up, especially if they have anything about cannabis or canna in their username or profile. On Facebook, if you search for somebody and they know it's cannabis, it'll say something like, if you know about somebody selling drugs on our platform, you need to let us know. It gives you a warning, but then it will take you to that page and help you find that page. We had a client that they weren't doing social media management with us, but they did get shut down. They were handling their social internally. What they were posting that got flagged were things that used to be okay. It was bud tenders recommending their favorite products, showing off products. It was talking about just using the words weed, using the words cannabis, anything like that. And so for the cannabis clients that we are creating content for, we are taking an even further step back. We'll show products, but we're not going to show anything lit. We've never showed anybody consuming products. No. That's always been banned. We are very much taking the approach that we have to be extremely careful.
We don't cross that line.
The line is now further back.
Businesses need to, when we tell them that, we're not just giving them suggestions.
Yes. No, we're seeing this because we're seeing these pages get shut down. And there's huge value in building the community around your brand, especially for cannabis on social media. If you go back and listen to the last episode on influencer marketing, a lot of that does specifically apply to cannabis because that is very much a community experience. It is a community event. People smoke together. They use the products together. It's very important to build that community on those platforms, but you have to follow those rules. So you want to be really careful. You should still show your bud tenders. Have them talk about things that they like to do while they're using cannabis, but don't say, I like to watch How High when I'm, blazing.
Right.
No,
right.
Like have them talk about it, and don't say while I'm high. You can just say when I'm in the mood. Use euphemisms and things like that, but have them talk about the things that they're doing. I like to go on hikes. I like to hang out with my friends. I'm going to a party this weekend, so we're going to be dabbing or something like that. Use words that are a little bit more slang that aren't obviously cannabis. Right. Dabbing is also a dance.
What I would say as a tip to any business owner, and goes with any social media management plan that we work with, is you are always going to be the expert in your business and what you run. So any cannabis owner out there that owns a retail dispensary understands their business inside and out. And hopefully they also understand rules and regulations as it relates to advertising. But you are not the social media expert because that's not the world you live in.
Right.
And that is why you either need to have somebody on your staff that completely understands the rules of social, and not just the rules of cannabis, but the rules of how to engage consumers.
Yes.
And that's why companies work with us.
So many companies, not just cannabis, want to use social media to sell their products.
Right.
We remind them that is not the point of social media.
The ROI is not the same on social media. It can be high, but I'm never going to tell you this is advertising. It is never advertising.
You can advertise.
Yes,
it's called Facebook ads or Meta ads.
Yes, we're not doing that.
You can't do that for cannabis.
No.
But your social content should be aimed at driving conversations and making your audience feel seen and building that community. That is how your brand is built on social media.
Yes.
That is how these platforms work. And if you are just posting ad after ad, regardless of your product or your service or your industry, you're going to tune people out. And that's why the average engagement rate on Facebook is like 1.5%. On Instagram, it's 2%. TikTok, it's like 2.5%. It's because there's so many people pushing out products. If you focus on creating content that makes people feel seen, it's relatable, it's funny, it provokes an emotional reaction, it makes them feel like this is relatable. That's why people like memes so much, is because they see themselves in it. And so if you focus on that in your content, cannabis brands that do really well, that's what they lean on. And that's I think, almost the rules and restrictions that social media platforms have in place give cannabis brands the extra incentive and the competitive advantage to do that. They're still competing against the other non-cannabis brands on social media for attention, but those people are just publishing ads if they don't know any better.
Somebody asked me once, do you ever say no to a client that you don't want to work with? And I said, sure.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something like this, where if I tell you that this is how this works and you want to go totally against what we're doing, then it doesn't really, you don't believe what we believe. And in this case, it's not just believe what we believe, but this is our business. First and foremost is digital marketing, and that encompasses social media marketing. If you hire us to do a job and we just take whatever you give us, then we're not doing our job.
100%. Well, and if you want advertising, do advertising. Don't do social media.
Exactly.
If you want to build a community and your brand and become top of mind, like if brand awareness is your goal, social media is a great solution. In addition to display ads and OTT and all these other ways that we can build brand awareness, social media is different because it is so engaging and community focused. But if you want to generate sales
You're
and
trying
grow
to get
your
leads.
leads.
Yeah, it's not social.
It's advertising.
Well, social is a lot of times the last thing we layer into our clients because we start with advertising that is purely advertising and we layer in services, which is social media.
Yes.
I never want to start with a service because I cannot tie it to ROI the same way I can advertising.
Correct.
In the cannabis industry, you're so limited to what you can do marketing that if you don't have both a advertising plan digitally and a social media plan, which is a service, then you are going to probably not do as well as those companies that know the importance of doing both. You can't do a paid ad on SEM on Google. You can't be found that way. Your limitations are different. If you're listening and you're a cannabis owner and you're saying I want to do one or the other, you're probably leaving a lot on the table. But if you have to only pick one, you have to start with advertising.
And then get that obvious ROI. And there is an ROI in social media content, but it is long term. It is hard to connect the numbers. The last thing I want to say on social media is LinkedIn is not as restrictive. The goal there is not, again, you're not trying to sell products on LinkedIn. You're trying to connect with dispensary owners, manufacturers, networking within the industry, and telling your brand story, talking about the importance of your team and the importance of what you're doing and how you're a great place to work. Because what I love about the cannabis industry is how networking focused and connected they are. LinkedIn is perfect for that. They are less restrictive on cannabis, but you still can't run ads for it.
No, but what I find is when it comes to cannabis, if you're pushing out blogs that are very educational, Google likes them. They very much have that in their algorithm somehow. I notice that when I'm doing research. I see a lot of LinkedIn good content blogs that start there. So if that's something else to think about is another layer is, part of social media is your content on social media. Part 2 of that is your content overall. It lives on your website as well as other platforms.
Yeah, 100%, especially with focusing on the education. So, well, we always like to wrap up with talking about ROI. Shannon, I want to ask you, why is digital marketing delivering the highest ROI for cannabis businesses compared to the other advertising channels? And what can businesses do to optimize their marketing approach this year?
Well, first and foremost, people used to think the only advertising I can do is this one particular, what's that director? I can't even think of it anymore.
Weed Maps?
Weed Maps. There were so many clients we would run into at the very beginning back in 2020 that they thought that's the only place they could be. Or they would just have their billboard that tell them to get off the exit. Digital marketing allows for precise targeting. That is something that you cannot get anywhere else. So first and foremost, when you can target your user and then connect to your point of sale system, and I know how many consumers not only clicked on the ad, but possibly put something in the cart and walked into a location, and I can track that, there's ROI there that you'll never get from your billboard.
That they make you pay to be included on, and with everybody else.
It's like Auto Trader, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't actually help you. And also you're forgetting about the dozens of other directories that people could potentially find you on, including Google.
Well, and the biggest thing we can do is we can say, okay, what's your conversion rate? Most customers don't know that, but I will tell you the cannabis industry does. Based on how many consumers walk into your store, how many of those are walking out with a purchase? They're converting. It's like 90%, if not higher. Mm-hmm. And on a low end, like I said earlier, your cart spend might be $50. So if I bring X amount of people not only to your website, but into your location, and you times that on a low end at $50 a spend per person, then I know exactly what that ROI is, and I compare it to what I spent in my digital that month. There's always a plus column. There's always a gross profit, right? Statistically, digital campaigns have a 4.5 times higher return on ad spend than any traditional marketing when it comes to cannabis. I just think what business owners need to know if they're cannabis industry is you are not probably in the business because you understand marketing, but you need a partner. This isn't something you can do on your own. You need an experienced partner. And I'm not telling you just to pick up the phone and call us. Pick up the phone and call somebody to help you, not only with your social, but true marketing, because the ROI is there better than anything else you do in the market when it comes to digital marketing. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Absolutely.
Well,
this was
and it's great timing. We wanted to do this right before the national holiday for cannabis, which is 420.
Yes.
Now, I've done my research on this in the past on where 420 started, but for the life of me, my mind is blank right now. Do you remember how did 420 start?
So there's a lore there, and there's a couple of different things that people have said, but I think what is accepted is that there was a group of high school students who said that they wanted to go out at 420 and smoke. And that for whatever reason, like that was when their school got let out. Or whatever.
It used to be Smoker's Corner back in my day. Like
so,
he would smoke cigarettes in the morning and after school.
Yeah. So at 420, that's when they got together and they would smoke after school. This was a group of high schoolers in California. When Phil Lesh from the Grateful Dead heard about this,
okay.
He was like, hell yeah, that's
You're
awesome.
gonna make this.
He started talking about it, and then it picked up, obviously, because the Grateful Dead and their cultural phenomenon that they were. So it just became something that everybody did.
Take it from somebody, to any of our listeners that are paying attention. I am not your experienced 420 person. I just am not. But I'm so intrigued by it now. And if you listen to me talk, it's because I've been educating myself for the last 6 years, understanding this industry. And I've walked into countless stores and talked to countless bud tenders to talk to them because I want to know more and educate myself. And it's amazing to me. I love the marketing aspect of it.
It's a really interesting industry.
Is.
It's certainly fun to learn about, and I feel like I learn something new about it every single week.
I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you to our listeners for tuning in today, and thank you to Krystal.
Thanks, Shannon.
And join us for our next episode of Digital Marketing ROI.
You've been listening to Digital Marketing ROI from Federated Digital Solutions. Do you have an idea for a future episode or a burning digital marketing question? Text ROI to 45364 to get a link where you can share your idea. Subscribe to get new episodes every other Thursday, plus Tip Tuesday insights every week.
Podcasts by Federated Media.